Hi, everyone. I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Zetta Elliott, who is a Black feminist writer. And she's written a lot of books, both for children, teens, and for adults. And I would like you, Zetta, to kind of tell us a little bit more about your books and about you.
Wow. Well,
That's a
I
big
have
thing, I
close
know.
to, yeah, I have close to 40 books for young readers. And my latest is Just Over My Shoulder, A Place Inside of Me, a poem to heal the heart. And the other book that came out this year was Say Her Name, a collection, my first collection of poetry. And, I have been writing in response to not just police brutality, but other forms of racial violence for 25 years now. My dissertation was on representations of racial violence. So because I've worked with kids for 30 years, I was always interested in trying to find a way to make sort of the true history of this country comprehensible to young readers in a way that didn't scare or shame them. And so A Place Inside of Me is a poem I wrote 20 years ago, and we finally managed to find the right editor. And now it's a book and it's available. And Say Her Name is sort of Black Lives Matter meets Black Girl Magic. So poems that celebrate Black girls' resilience and intelligence and creativity and activism. Let's see, I used to write plays. I'm starting to move back towards theater now. I write essays, I blog, I do a whole bunch of different things. I'm working on the third book in my dragon series. So I have Dragons in a Bag and The Dragon Thief. I would call what I write historical fantasy. So it's generally not your straightforward historical fiction because there's a magical element to it, whether that's time travel or a ghost from the past coming into the present. So yeah, I think I've sort of been focusing on the same issues for the past 30 years. And unfortunately, it's a topic that doesn't get old and remains topical. And yeah, that's sort of an introduction. I'm an immigrant. I was born in Canada and I grew up there. And I have lived here in the US for 26 years. Yeah, and I just turned 48 on Monday. That was my birthday. So
Wow, happy birthday. Wow, that's
thank
amazing.
you.
So you're actually writing on topics that are really relevant right now, actually.
I would say so. It's been a little challenging though, because the two books that I mentioned, A Place Inside of Me and Say Her Name, have not been reviewed. So there are five main review outlets, trade outlets, if you're in the world of children's literature, and we've only gotten two reviews from each of them. So it's pretty frustrating that, reviewers might be looking at Fluffy Goes to the Beach. That seems like an important book to them, but not a book that shows how a Black child deals with emotions brought on by a police shooting in their community. So publishing has been quite quite a challenge and an education, but I'm fortunate that I have a scholarly training that helps me sort of look at it critically, because you take it personally when you get rejected and then you realize there's something bigger going on. And that's, the protests this past spring actually pushed a lot of publishers to finally start making some changes, but we'll see how that actually plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I would hope that they would buy more of your type of book nowadays. That would be a good thing. Yeah.
Would hope.
Yeah.
I'm not
So
going to
what
hold
made
my breath.
what made you want to become a writer?
I was a storyteller. I was a kid who liked, I was the youngest in my family and I wanted to have an audience. And it's pretty hard when you're the youngest to get your older siblings to listen to you. But if I, could tell my friends a really good story, then I could have a little audience of people clustered around me in the schoolyard. And things in my family started out pretty good. And then my older brother, who was adopted, was returned to his birth parents in the Caribbean. And then my parents got divorced and we moved to a new school. And I was not put in the gifted and talented program, even though I had skipped a grade. So kind of like the years when I was 8 or 9 years old, that was a pretty pivotal moment for me. And I felt out of control a lot of the time. It just felt like adults were making decisions and you just had to deal with it. But storytelling was a way in which I could control things. And so, every kid has to write for school. So I was always happy to write for school. And then I had an English teacher who told me I could be a writer if I wanted to be. She told me that in high school, and so I started writing outside of school. And it's just a really empowering experience to know that you can control everything about a character. And it was therapeutic too. So writing for kids was a good way for me to write the books that I wished I'd had as a child, because I never had books with Black characters when I was growing up in Canada. And, you know, I could do something about that.
It's amazing what teachers can do to help you in your careers.
Yeah, the right teacher at the right moment has changed a lot of lives.
Yeah. So for readers unfamiliar with your work, you actually kind of answered this, but how would you describe what you write, and what can readers expect from your latest book? So you've kind of already answered that. So I'm going to go on to the next one. What kind of research went into writing your latest book? And what's your favorite research story? And what cool facts and findings didn't make it into the book, but you love discovering?
Oh my goodness. Well, I didn't have to do any research for A Place Inside of Me. That's a poem that I wrote about emotions. But it helped that I was writing my dissertation at the time. So, you know, I've been studying African American history for a very long time. Say Her Name, I didn't have to do very much research, although there is a section at the back called Notes, and each poem, you know, quite often will reference a particular victim of police violence. And if you wanted to know more about that person, you could look that up. That's pretty grim history to try to keep track of all the names and the lives and the stories of all the victims of police violence. Right now, I'm working on The Witch's Apprentice, which is book 3 in the Dragon series. And it's super fun because I wrote the first 2 books while I was living in Brooklyn. They're set in Brooklyn. And now I live in Evanston, Illinois, and the 3rd book is set in Chicago. So every couple of weeks I go into the city and walk around and do some research, scope out some sites. I have a fantastic guidebook that 2 Black women put together that talk about the achievements of Black women in the South Side of Chicago. And I already knew about Ida B. Wells because of my work on lynching, but to know that she lived there and Gwendolyn Brooks lived in Bronzeville, and you know, so I'm finding some historic sites that I'm working into the novel. So even though, you know, it's about witches having a convention in Chicago, it's a great opportunity to sort of talk about DuSable, who was the first non-native settler of what became Chicago, an African-American man with roots in Haiti. I also have roots in the Caribbean. So that's some of the research that I've been doing. The thing about historical fiction, or even historical fantasy, is you do a ton of research and use 10 to 15% of it. So I couldn't even begin to say all of the things that I have left out of my books, because you always find things that are interesting, but just not pertinent to the story. And so you have to curate and decide what goes in, what contributes to world building and what doesn't. You know, I have a lot of projects that I haven't finished yet. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to my Viking novel. I went to Sweden a couple of years ago to do research on that, and just haven't had a chance to write it. And that'll be for adults. So I'm looking forward to finishing up some projects this year so I can get back to that book.
So that kind of brings me to another question: is what do we expect next from you?
Yeah, so when I finished, the 3rd Dragon book is due November 15th. So I have to turn that in, but it probably won't come out until 2022. And then I have a collaboration, a novel in verse for middle grade readers that I'm working on with Lynn Miller Lockman, and that's with FSG. That'll also probably come out in 2022, and it's called Moonwalking, a novel in verse. Lynn's protagonist is a boy with undiagnosed autism. He's Polish American, and he has moved from Long Island into Brooklyn, and he's going to school. He's one of the few white students at a school that's majority Black and Latinx. And my character is a 13-year-old Afro-Puerto Rican boy who has just discovered Jean-Michel Basquiat. So he's totally into graffiti, but he wants to get more into the art world. But his mother is schizophrenic, and so he's dealing with the impact of mental illness on his family. So that book that we have to work on next, we'll get our editorial notes and we'll finish working on that. I have another picture book that, I don't know, I haven't heard from that editor in over a year, but that's supposed to be coming out next year. So I'll have to check in with her on that. And I was living in Pennsylvania last year, so I started a novel there, which is about a group of teenage girls who have been convicted of murder, and they were sentenced and placed in adult prisons, and then through a restorative justice program they have been released from prison, and they're being introduced to this program where they have to live in a halfway house, and half part of their time they're working on their GED and the rest of the time they're working on an Amish farm. So it was an interesting sort of mixture of prose and poetry. And one of the girls hears voices at night and then finds out that there's a cemetery, African-American cemetery on the farm that they work on. And so she starts to learn more about the people who are buried in the cemetery because it's their voices she's hearing. So my agent really wants that by the end of this year, but that's not going to happen. So maybe by spring I can get that to her.
Wow, I am just so impressed with all the different issues that you bring up in your books. They're just amazing.
So many stories.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, my next question is, what was the inspiration for your latest book, and what were the steps that you took to bring it from initial inspiration to the finished book?
So if it's The Witch's Apprentice, then that's a series. So we've had the first 2 books already. And the characters, they had 3 baby dragons they had to deliver to the realm of magic, and 1 baby dragon didn't make it. So they had to go back and find the dragon thief. And now, Jax is training to be a witch. He thinks he wants to be a witch. He's a witch's apprentice, but he's not being trained in the way he wants. And he's starting to wonder if that's his true destiny, and should he be helping witches if what they really want to do is to keep magic in the realm of magic instead of letting it seep into our world. He'd kind of like to see more magic in our world. So, that idea came about in 2016. A friend had sent me 4 tiny dragons, and I kept them in my bag because I emptied out a mint tin and put them in the mint tin so I could walk around with them. And that's what the witch in the story does. She keeps dragons in her bag in a mint tin. So quite often, I get inspiration from gifts, things that my friends send me, or things in my neighborhood. I really think it's important that kids know that magic can happen to anyone, anywhere. So it's really important to sort of look around your neighborhood with fresh eyes and imagine different possibilities. So that's what I try to do for that series. Yeah.
Wow. Okay. What was the biggest challenge in writing and putting out your latest book, and how did you overcome that challenge?
Well, for A Place Inside of Me, it was overcoming racism in publishing. And I don't know if I can say I have overcome racism in publishing, but my agent managed to find an editor who did not say, oh, this story is too sad, which I often hear. I showed my agent that story and she thought it was too sad. And then, within a week, Philando Castile and Alton Sterling were shot and killed by police. And she wrote to me and said, you know what, I wish kids had your book right now because it would help them. And so she sent it to a couple of editors, and one said he was too busy to look at it, and the other one said she absolutely loved it. So Grace Kendall at FSG, I'm really lucky that it landed in her hands. And she paired me with Noah Denman, who did just absolutely gorgeous illustrations. And so, yeah, like I said, it took 20 years for us to find the right editor, and then we made this beautiful book, and then it hasn't been reviewed. So if your book doesn't get reviewed, then it's not on the radar of folks who make up the best of the year lists. And if it's not on that list, then it's probably not come to the attention of awards committee members. So, publishing is a system, and trying to fight all of the barriers to overcome the barriers in the system is really, really difficult. But you don't give up on your stories. So I'm glad that I didn't give up and throw away.
Yeah.
I still have 20 picture book manuscripts on my hard drive, and my agent probably will not be able to sell all of those. So I do self-publish. That's a big way that I address or respond to racism in publishing. It's an act of resistance. People think it's about vanity, but it's really not. If you're writing stories that your community needs, and the people who work in publishing aren't from your community and don't necessarily have an investment in your community, then you have to do whatever you can do. And there's a long tradition in the Black community of self-reliance and, starting our own institutions, starting our own presses. So I think about Audre Lorde and Barbara Smith in Kitchen Table Women of Color Press, a lot of radical Black feminists in Boston and in Massachusetts were doing really important work. So I think I'm in pretty good company.
That's great. So there are some other Black publishing companies out there now.
Absolutely. So Just Us Books was founded in the 80s, and One World, Third World Books, Hakeem Madhubuti. I mean, we could go back as far as Martin Delaney, self-publishing a pamphlet, an abolitionist pamphlet in the late 1700s. So yeah, there's a long history of folks doing it on their own.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's great. What character did you love or hate the most while writing, and why?
Yeah, I don't hate any of my characters. I wouldn't write a character that I hated. I think it's fun to make villains a bit more complicated and to have kids question whether or not what it means to be a villain and how easy it is to call someone that. There's a little bit of me in all of my characters. I think I wrote my first ghost story in 2010, Ship of Souls, and that was about 3 friends, Dee, Nyla, and Hakeem. And Nyla just really stayed with me. And I remember waking up one morning and hearing someone ask her, "Are you sure you're fully human?" And I knew in that moment that she wasn't. And then she ended up having her own book, The Deep, and another book, The Return. And maybe I wanted it to be a trilogy, but I sort of left it hanging. So I might have to go back and finish that. But Nyla's a character that really sticks with me, a teenage girl who discovers she inherited magical powers from the mother who walked out on her when she was just a young child. I'm really interested in teenage girls, because I didn't feel like I had a whole lot of power when I was a teenage girl, but I wanted power. Mm-hmm. And, what do you do when someone suddenly gives it to you? Suddenly you have all the power in the world. How do you know how to wield it responsibly? So I'm interested, as a feminist, I'm interested in that conversation.
Right. So I guess you kind of answered the question, but what draws you to the particular genre or style that you write? And what do you think draws readers to these kinds of books?
I think almost every reader just wants a good story. They want characters they can relate to and invest in and care about. So even though, I'm interested in fantasy and time travel and ghost stories, I don't go see horror movies. I'm not into blood and gore, but I think you can create really compelling relationships. And so most of my stories develop based on the voice of my character. I have to hear their voice, and then I have to know where they stand in relationship to someone else. So, it was fun to develop a witch in Brooklyn who's like 6 feet tall, this Black woman with a big white afro, and she's got these dragons in her bag, but there's no way to create a story just around her. She has to be doing something with someone else. And it turns out, she's training a young boy, and she doesn't particularly like kids. And he thinks she's his grandmother, and then she's like, "I'm not your grandmother." So it's like, what do they mean to each other, and how do they rely on each other? And Jackson rather has lost his father a couple of years ago, so he's really sort of yearning for adult guidance and comfort and support in his life, and he ultimately ends up finding that with Ma. So I think relationships are really what make a story compelling and what make you keep turning the pages, because you want to see how people rely on each other or betray each other. That's the drama, I think, of any story.
Great. What's your favorite part of being a writer, on the whole writing and publishing process? And what do you think has been your greatest lesson on the journey so far?
Wow, the greatest lesson is have your own definition of success. So the industry will tell you you're only successful if you end up on the New York Times bestseller list. And so many really wonderful books never make it to the New York Times bestseller list. They never win prizes. In my case, they may not even get reviewed or get gold stars. So try not to overinvest in what other people say is the way to measure the value of your work. I think, my goal is sovereignty, is to be able to write what I want, when I want, how I want it. And I'm fortunate that I'm able to do this now at this point in my career. Mm-hmm. I was a professor for 10 years, and then I quit that. And so for 6 years, I've been able to live full-time as a writer. And I feel very fortunate. to be able to do that. And a place inside of me, a teacher reached out on Twitter to show a page of the book that has a beautiful flowery mural, and how she was reading the book to her students virtually. And one student said, wait, 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 and ran and got this floral head, sort of a crown really, put it over their head and said, look, it's just like that picture. So, you know, when you offer kids a mirror and they can see themselves in the book in some way and identify, I think that's pretty powerful. So that's the most important lesson, I think, is have your own definition of success, and don't use someone else's yardstick to measure your worth.
And what's your favorite part of being a writer?
Writing.
Okay.
I'm an introvert. I'm not that crazy about crowds. And I can very easily think of my least favorite part, but I think the writing is the most fun when you've got the idea. And it's, you know, writing, I always tell people, is 70% dreaming. So by the time you've got the dream worked out and can sit down and finally start typing, then you just fly and the words, fill up the pages. And then you've got something that, you can share that'll be meaningful to kids. I know kids are waiting. They're like, when's the next book coming? So, so I'm glad that I can keep them coming, keep feeding their imagination.
So what is your least favorite part now that you mentioned that?
Signing books. I find signing
Really?
books really, challenging because, people wait in line. They're so patient and kind to wait in line, but ultimately they're strangers, and usually there's an assistant who writes down their name on a Post-it. And so you're just looking at their name and writing. You can't really write something personal because you haven't had a personal interaction with them. You don't have time to stop and find out who they are or what their interests are. And so you almost feel like you need a stamp, like just sit there and stamp the books. And it feels very impersonal. But people are waiting. And so, and then trying to come up with something meaningful, because I generally have like 3 or 4 things that I write in each book, and you just rotate through it over and over. So yeah, that's my least favorite part.
Oh, wow. So what piece of advice would you want to share with other writers?
Get your work done. Get your work done, especially for marginalized writers. We can end up spending a lot of time advocating for equality and equity and inclusion. And there's always a dumpster fire on Twitter that needs to be put out, but ask yourself, is your book done? And if it's not, you have to find that right balance between your activism and actually getting the work done. Because at the end of the day, that is your job, is to write the stories and to get stories into the world. So unfortunately, we're burdened with the responsibility of explaining to the industry why it is excluding us, and then coming up with solutions and ways to change it. But I think the most important thing is to make your work a priority, get your work done.
Okay. How important has the New England setting been to your work? Have you done anything written about New England at all?
Wow. A very long time ago. I taught at Mount Holyoke College from 2006 to 2009, but I only lived in Massachusetts, Western Mass, for 1 year. And during that year, that was my playwriting phase. So I was writing a lot of plays. And I think I have at least a couple that are set in like a women's college in Western Massachusetts. So I was definitely drawing on my experience at Mount Holyoke. But I'm Canadian, so New England feels very familiar to me. It's still funny to me that I have friends from the South who still teach at Mount Holyoke, and they've been there 30 years and they still can't handle the snow. And I just think,
speaking of which, it's snowing today.
Right, I'm like, it's winter. Like, I'm so excited to be here in Chicagoland, and it snowed on my birthday. And unusual for me to get snow in October, but hey, I love it. I just think, it's winter. You have the beautiful leaves and you have maple syrup, and there are just so many lovely things that come from, being in a temperate climate in the Northeast. So yeah, I love it.
What question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Oh my goodness. What question do I wish they would ask me? I guess something about legacy. I think when you're writing I mean, I have a friend who jokes that I drop books the way Prince drops albums, because Prince, people know him for like Purple Rain, but he had so many albums after that. And then he died unexpectedly, right? He died young or prematurely and had a vault full of material. And now we're trying to figure out what to do with all the unpublished material. And I just think, I don't want to die with a vault. Like, I want the vault to be empty by the time I pass away. I want to make sure that what I've written is out in the world. But it's not just about the books existing, you know, like, I'm really fortunate that because I was a professor for 10 years, I still have a number of professor friends. In fact, I just reached out to one from Mount Holyoke yesterday because I need some help with a play. I'm adapting one of my books of poetry for the stage and I need some help. But I'm fortunate that my professor friends teach my work. And, you know, if you publish a book as an African-American author and it does not get a shiny gold sticker on the cover, it is pretty much guaranteed to go out of print very quickly. And so it can be a situation where almost you feel like you're being erased, like you made this book and then publishers didn't promote it or it wasn't reviewed or whatever happens, and then it just disappears. And I think when academics, when professors teach your work, especially because they're teaching teachers, they're teaching future librarians, they're teaching literature students, future parents, you know, to think critically about children's literature. Yeah, I hope that at some point, you know, when I'm gone, people will look back and say, she was an advocate, you know, her activism was important. She wrote a lot of essays on the disparities in publishing, but she really, you know, put her heart into her stories. And when you read her stories, you can see how much she loves children, Black children in particular. And I hope that is the legacy, is that people will know I wrote out of love.
That's wonderful. So what is or are your passions when you're not writing? And how do you make time for your non-writing hobbies and things that you love?
I don't really have non-writing hobbies. So that's not hard. I read. I try to make sure I read an hour a day. The pandemic has made that a little challenging, but I do try to read every day. So that's one hobby which directly contributes. It's like feeding your imagination. So that's good for writing. I need to be near nature. And so I am a big walker and I don't have a car. I only want to live somewhere where I don't have to have a car. That was really challenging in Western Massachusetts. But, you know, it's so beautiful and there's so many paths and trails. And now I live, you know, very close to Lake Michigan, which is just beautiful and every day looks different. So being outside is really important to me, being near trees. I used to have a deck at my last apartment and I had bird feeders so I could see birds all through the day. I kind of missed that. But, you know, my passions really, as a Black feminist, I'm interested in justice. I'm interested in equity and making sure that everybody has an equal opportunity. And that clearly is an ongoing struggle. And so it's good to connect with other people online. Thank God for social media, especially as an introvert, because even if it wasn't a pandemic, I'd probably still be living close to how I live right now. I don't go out all that much. But, you know, I love history and I love exploring. So to be in a new place and to be able to start doing research on the history of the place. I've been to the Historical Society and I've got this guidebook that I'm using and I'm connecting with historians. And then as soon as you start talking about your research online, all of my library archivist friends start making suggestions. So it's a great way to sort of build community, even though research can be fairly solitary and you can be in the basement with a musty old book. You can still connect to other people who share a love of history.
Okay. And what are some of your writing related hobbies or crafts or addictions?
Aside from reading, I don't know that I really have any. I try to buy more books now than I have in the past. I'm a big library fan and grew up relying on the library because we didn't have money to be buying books. I love giving people books as gifts. I have not yet tapped into my latent artistic ability. I am left-handed and I would love to start making some illustrations of my own. I do have one book behind me I made by hand, but yeah, I haven't really explored that yet.
Okay. What does your writing space look like and what do you need to have around you while writing or editing?
I have an office, but I don't generally write in my office. I get up and I start the day there, but it's mostly answering emails, which takes half the day. And then I generally sit on the couch in my living room. So I need a comfortable couch with a pillow on my back because I have back issues, a glass of water, something to munch on that's hopefully not too unhealthy. A bag of mini carrots is usually nearby. And good light. You know, I always try to live on the top floor of a building, so I get a lot of light and I don't have anybody marching overhead. And I need quiet. And that has been the best thing about moving to Evanston. I don't think I've ever lived in a neighborhood that is this quiet. So that's mostly what I need to write. I can write anywhere. Like I wouldn't go to a cafe because you've got that crazy espresso machine going off all the time. I don't want the distraction of people around me. I just want to be by myself and quiet.
You kind of answered my next two questions, but so do you use a computer or do you write by hand?
I am left-handed, and the days of being able to actually read my handwriting are long gone. So I was fortunate that I took typing in high school, and I can type close to 100 words a minute. So yeah, wow. I absolutely use my laptop on my lap. I don't sit at a desk to write very often. Sometimes I'll stand if I need a break on my back. But yeah, no, I type.
Okay. What is the one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Probably that I'm an introvert. I think, you know, as an author, you have to do public speaking, and a lot of people think that I am, you know, maybe confrontational because I speak up when I see something wrong, but I'm actually conflict averse. I would much rather not have a conflict with people. Yeah, I think people assume that if you're a writer and you're on social media that you just love to talk, or, you know, I'm kid free by choice. And a lot of people assume that if you write for kids and work with kids, you must love kids and want to be around them all the time. And, you know, I like quiet. So that generally means I have to limit how much time I spend with kids. I do love kids, but I couldn't be around them all the time. And if I had kids, you know, I wouldn't have 40 books. So I'm pretty clear on the trade-off.
Okay. And what's been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Favorite adventure? Well, I guess because I am an introvert, it is sort of an adventure trying to meet other authors and connect with them. And that was challenging because I do have some views, some points of view that run counter to what most authors feel. And I think you do have to rock the boat sometimes, and that doesn't always win me friends. But connecting with other radical writers who self-publish, some of them are indie authors, started their own presses. Most of them are on the West Coast, and we meet once a month and have been doing that, gosh, for maybe 5 or 6 years now. So that's kind of been the biggest adventure, is finding people who share your values, share your definition of success, share your commitment to social justice, and don't judge you for making decisions. You know, like I've met some indie authors who feel like I shouldn't ever publish with a traditional press like Random House because it's selling out, and or I self-publish, you know, with Create Space or Kindle Direct, and so that's a no-no for many purists who can't stand Amazon, which I completely understand. But it's been really rewarding to find a group of people who say, you know what, we're invested in you personally as an individual, not just for what you can produce, and to have sustained a community with those people. I think that's been a real worthy adventure.
Okay, and that kind of leads me on to my next question is, are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you'd recommend to other writers that have helped you in your career?
So I'm not a joiner. So I have to say that I did not join some of the children's literature groups that are out there, or I did join them and then left after a year because it wasn't a good fit for me. But, you know, you can find a lot of organizations online. And then if you don't have the money to join some of those, because they do require membership, you can just make your own writing group online. I think that's the best thing about social media, is the way in which it allows us to form communities of like-minded people. So there are lots of writing groups on Facebook, and, you know, I'm part of some of them, and some of them I'm not very active in. But really, you know, if you find one or two other writers in your neighborhood, or if they're not in your neighborhood, in your social network, and making a commitment to meet with those people, to swap manuscripts, to share tips, to share leads and articles. I find that's really useful. There's a group on Facebook, Kidlit Authors of Color, and I recommend most people who reach out to me, if they're from a marginalized group, that they should check that out, because resources get posted on that page, and that keeps you in the loop.
Okay, thank you. While you're writing, okay, you've already answered this one, but it's do you prefer music, silence, or other? You've already said silence. I don't want anything.
I do listen to music. I used to write with the TV on. I no longer have cable, so I don't write with the TV on generally. Although the other day I started this Netflix series, The Worst Witch, and it was not the worst viewing experience, but it wasn't working for me. But having it on the background while I was writing about my own witches was actually kind of useful. So I do listen to music. For this novel, I've been listening to a lot of Beyonce, Black is
Okay. Next question is, writers often have furry or feathered animals or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any, or how do they help or not help you with your writing?
So I have some stuffed dragons. I am allergic, sadly. I grew up with pets, but I am severely allergic, so I don't have any furry friends.
Oh, that's too bad. Okay, now, and you mentioned that you have certain foods, but do you have any favorite foods or drinks that must be in the vicinity and must be avoided that while you're writing or editing a piece of work?
Must be avoided?
Or must be with you. I must have coffee or something like that.
I don't drink coffee and I don't drink alcohol, but I have sugar issues. So my reward for anything is always like a piece of chocolate, or there's a really great pie shop around the corner from me. So sadly, I've been having a lot of pie, and they change the flavors every day. Yeah, my reward when I'm trying to write 1,000 words a day for this novel, and if I meet my quota, then yeah, there's definitely some chocolate.
Yep. Now, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome
that? To be honest, it's getting published. Like writing for me is not hard, but you can finish a manuscript and think it's fantastic and revise it and share it with your agent, and your agent loves it, and then she simply can't sell it. So that's the biggest challenge. I have not yet figured out exactly how to overcome it, because the publishing industry is homogenous. It is not very diverse, and it's hard to get your story into the hands of somebody who sees its value. So that's the biggest challenge, and I'm not entirely sure how to overcome it. A lot of publishers lately have announced that they're hiring Black women in senior positions, and maybe that will change some things. But as long as the acquisitions editors and the editorial board and the team don't look like me and don't come from my community and don't know much about my culture, it's always going to be a struggle, I think.
Okay. And what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Be yourself. Try to be honest when you're writing, and don't write what's expedient. Write what's true. Jane Cortez says, find your own voice and use it, use your own voice and find it. So I think the more you write, the more you are able to sort of shut out your influences in a way and actually get down to your own true voice. And so I think when I first started writing, as a teenager, I read a lot of Charles Dickens. And then I was trying to write like Charles Dickens. That was my main goal. And then I moved to the States, and I had a friend say, oh my goodness, your writing is so British. And I was just horrified because I wanted to write like Alice Walker, but I'm not from Georgia. I'm not an African-American woman from the Deep South. So I needed to really figure out what it meant to be someone who has African-American ancestry, but Caribbean ancestry, who grew up in a former British colony, reading a lot of British fiction. There's no way to entirely erase that influence, but I think the more you write and the more you sit with your own voice and hear your own voice clearly, the better you're able to sort of honor your authentic voice.
Okay. Well, that was actually my last question for you.
Woohoo!
Well, it only took 45 minutes, not an hour. It was hard, wasn't it?
Well, very much. I know I tend to pack a lot into an answer. So
wow, that was amazing. I want to thank you very much for joining us today, and good luck with getting everything published. I mean, it's so necessary. It's just so necessary nowadays for young Black children and even for adults.
Everybody, right? Yeah.
You know, to get this kind of book out there, because there hasn't been this kind of book, you know, these kinds of books out there.
Not as many as we need. Yes.
It's exactly what we need out there, you know, and hopefully it will help to get these things out there.
And thank you for, you know, creating a platform to let authors talk about their work. So
oh, you're welcome. And oh, by the way, I just wanted to ask you a couple of quick things. Where, aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, I wanted to give us a little plug. We're at 65 James Street in Worcester, Massachusetts. You can call us at 508-796-5613, and you can order her books. You can order Zetta's books. And you can, and we can get any of her books that you would like. And we also have other books, any other books that you would want, we can get for you, and we mail them out. You can come and visit us if you're around the Worcester area, or if you're visiting the Worcester area. Nowadays that would be a little tough, but we do have a webpage, www.anniesbooksworcester.com. So and you can order us, send us an email at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And so where else can people get your books?
If they go to my website, zettaelliott.com, it'll link to Bookshop, and Bookshop has most of my books. And then you can also select an indie bookstore you'd like to support. So that's a great way to get your books online and make sure that you're still supporting an indie bookstore. And yeah, my website is a good place to start if you cannot make it to Annie's.
Okay, and also, how else can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
If you're on Facebook, I have an author page, author Zetta Elliott. And if you're on Instagram or Twitter, I'm at Zetta Elliott.
Okay, well, thanks again. And we hope to, you know, maybe sometime after this COVID is over with, maybe have you at the store.
That's okay. Great. I'd love to come back to Worcester. Thanks very much, Selena.
Okay, thank you very much, Zetta.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.